happy. We now want to bring in our next guest here on America Talks Live, and that is Daniel Turner, the founder of an organization called Power the Future. Dan, welcome to the program. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me on.
So, Dan, what can you tell us about what happened yesterday, and what does it mean for the U.S. when we talk about oil prices?
In terms of oil prices?
Yes.
Energy, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many variables when it comes to the world market on oil. The president has put a lot of pressure on companies who do business with Iran, foreign companies. Even our German ambassador, Rick Grenell, recently said he was going to use his office to influence European companies who are dealing business with Iran. And so taking Iranian oil off of the stage is going to have a huge impact on the world prices of oil. There's no doubt.
Now, as these sanctions go into effect against Iran, there's a report that we, the United States, could be buying more oil from Russia, of all places. Energy Secretary Rick Perry will be meeting with Russia's energy minister next week to discuss this. But the U.S. is also producing more oil than it ever has. In January, we hit 10 million barrels daily. That's the most since the previous peak in 1970. So why would the United States buy from Russia instead of boosting our own production even more?
And we don't want to buy from Russia, and that's a great point. And that's what my organization does, is we fight for energy workers across the nation. And part of this is pushing back on radical environmental groups who try to take oil production offline. From our perspective, because it hurts workers and it hurts rural communities. But think of it on the international stage. America has the ability to produce enough domestic oil and also to be a net exporter of oil. So if we take Iran off the stage, Venezuela is losing about $500,000 barrels of oil a day because of their socialist problems. America has enough to compensate for our own use and for international use, and we need to push back on any effort to try to curtail or stop American oil production.
Dan, you mentioned your organization. It's called Power the Future. Put all this together for us. What does this mean for energy workers here, and what does your organization do?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great organization that fights for energy workers in rural communities and their jobs and their livelihood. And it does this by pushing back on the radical green agenda. Look at the politics of yesterday. A popular and powerful Democrat leader, Joe Crowley, lost to an avowed socialist. She's a Bernie Sanders supporter. Bernie Sanders is more radical than even former President Obama. He's opposed to nuclear. He's opposed to all forms of hydraulic fracking. If we followed Bernie Sanders' model, what would happen to energy prices in America and worldwide? And from my perspective, what would happen to these rural communities and the men and women, millions of them, who work in the energy industry? And so it is really important that we push back on these green efforts to try to destroy American energy efforts, to destroy oil, gas, coal. And we also support renewables. We support wind and solar as well. But our economy runs on domestic energy production, on fossil fuels, and that's why we're called Power the Future.
All right, Daniel Turner, Power the Future. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me on. Take care.
All right, you do the same.